June 23, 2021, Los Angeles Superior Court. A voice that once made the world dance now trembles with desperation. I just want my life back. Britney Spears, the woman whose songs defined a generation, must beg a judge for something most people take for granted: the right to control her own existence. 22 years earlier, thunderous applause greeted a 17-year-old in pigtails asking if we were ready for her debut. Today, that same voice pleads behind closed courtroom doors, each word a key trying to unlock 13 years of legal captivity. The girl who once declared herself a slave for you had discovered the lyrics were prophetic rather than provocative. I've been a prisoner my whole life, she confesses, her voice breaking with years of suppressed truth. How did the princess of pop become a prisoner of her own success? How did protection become punishment, care become captivity, applause become chains? The golden cage was built one platinum record at a time, forged by the very industry that claimed to love her. She danced like an angel and paid like a prisoner. The transformation from small-town innocence to manufactured commodity began with lessons that seemed harmless at the time, but would prove psychologically devastating in their cumulative effect. Born December 2, 1981 in Macomb, Mississippi, Britney Jean Spears entered a world where talent was currency and childhood was negotiable. Her mother, Lynn, recognized early that her daughter possessed something special, a desperate-to-please eagerness that would prove both blessing and curse. The Spears family wasn't wealthy, but they understood investment in ways that would reshape their daughter's entire relationship with love, approval, and self-worth. Every dollar spent on dance lessons was a down payment on escape from small-town limitations, but it was also an installment plan for psychological conditioning that would make authentic selfhood increasingly difficult to maintain. At the Mickey Mouse Club, 8-year-old Britney learned to suppress authentic reactions in favor of predetermined responses that tested better with focus groups. When she felt tired, she was taught to smile brighter. When she felt sad, she was instructed to project energy that would keep audiences engaged. When she felt confused by adult situations she didn't understand, she was coached to nod and agree as if everything made perfect sense. These weren't presented as deceptions, but as professional skills. The ability to give audiences what they wanted regardless of personal feelings. The Disney machine understood that children's natural emotions were unpredictable and commercially risky, so they systematically replaced authentic responses with reliable market-tested alternatives. What they didn't understand, or perhaps didn't care about, was that this process was teaching vulnerable young people that their genuine feelings were problems to be solved rather than experiences to be honored. The other children in the program were going through similar conditioning, creating a peer environment where emotional authenticity became increasingly rare and difficult to maintain. Christina Aguilera, who went through the same program alongside Britney, would later describe the experience as learning to be perfect all the time, which is impossible and psychologically damaging. The two girls developed a complex relationship during this period, genuinely caring for each other while simultaneously being positioned as rivals by an industry that thrived on manufactured competition between female performers. Justin Timberlake, also part of this cohort, seemed to navigate the pressures more successfully, perhaps because societal expectations for male performers allowed for more emotional range and personal flaws. While the girls were expected to embody impossible combinations of innocence and sophistication, the boys could display confidence, mischief, and even occasional arrogance without threatening their commercial viability. The psychological impact of this early conditioning cannot be overstated. By the time Britney left the Mickey Mouse Club in 1995, she had spent several formative years learning that love and approval were conditional on performance quality, that authentic emotions were inconveniences to be managed, and that her value as a person was directly connected to her usefulness as an entertainer. These lessons would shape every relationship and decision for the rest of her life. When the show ended, 14-year-old Britney faced a choice that wasn't really hers. Return to Louisiana for normal teenage experiences or pursue opportunities her television success had created. Families don't invest years in talent development to watch their children choose ordinary lives over extraordinary possibilities. The decision had been made long before she was old enough to understand what she was agreeing to sacrifice. The transition period between child performer and teenage pop star involved increasingly sophisticated forms of control, disguised as career development. The team assembled around her included vocal coaches, dance instructors, image consultants, and media trainers who worked together to eliminate any remaining traces of authentic personality that might interfere with the commercial product they were creating. The process was gradual enough that she didn't recognize it as systematic dismantling of her individual identity. Each coaching session, each image adjustment, each behavioral modification was presented as helping her achieve her dreams. The accumulated effect was the creation of someone who looked like Britney Spears, sounded like Britney Spears, and moved like Britney Spears, but whose inner life had been so thoroughly colonized by external expectations that she was losing access to her own thoughts and feelings. By 1997, 16-year-old Britney had signed with Jive Records. The process wasn't collaborative. She was presented with songs, choreography, and image concepts created by teams who understood teenage psychology better than most teenagers understood themselves. Her job was executing their vision with enough charisma to make manufactured authenticity seem genuine. The recording of "Baby One More Time" marked the completion of this transformation process. The 16-year-old girl who entered the studio was already more product than person, trained to execute other people's creative visions with minimal input about artistic direction or personal comfort with the material. The schoolgirl outfit that became iconic wasn't her idea. It was chosen by adults who understood that combining childhood innocence with adult sexuality would create maximum commercial impact regardless of how it might affect the person wearing the costume. The choreography for the music video required her to perform movements that she privately found uncomfortable and inappropriate, but she had been so thoroughly conditioned to prioritize professional obligations over personal feelings that she completed the shoot without meaningful protest. The director's vision took precedence over her instincts. The record label's commercial goals superseded her aesthetic preferences, and the marketing team's strategy overruled her concerns about how she would be perceived by audiences. The first chains were being forged in those recording studios link by link, as applause began replacing approval and performance began consuming personality. When the single became a global phenomenon, the positive response seemed to validate every compromise she had made during the creation process. But this validation came at the cost of her ability to distinguish between genuine success and manufactured approval, between authentic achievement and synthetic stardom. The explosion of "Baby One More Time" in late 1998 wasn't just a hit song. It was a cultural detonation that redefined pop stardom for the 21st century. The music video, with its provocative schoolgirl imagery and infectious choreography, became an instant icon, launching thousands of imitations and igniting debates about sexualization, empowerment, and the razor-thin line between both. But success at this magnitude brought pressures no teenager should navigate alone. Almost overnight, Britney transformed from promising young performer to the most famous teenager in the world, with every aspect of her life subject to global scrutiny and commercial exploitation. The infrastructure supporting her career expansion overlooked one crucial detail. The person at the empire's center was still a child who needed guidance, protection, and space for normal developmental mistakes without international consequences. The touring schedule that followed was relentless in ways that would have challenged experienced entertainers, much less someone who was still developmentally a teenager despite her professional responsibilities. The physical demands of nightly performances were compounded by the emotional labor of maintaining perfect public persona in cities across the world, with each appearance requiring her to project enthusiasm and gratitude regardless of her actual physical or emotional state. Night after night, she performed for audiences who saw her as fantasy embodiment, rather than real person with real limitations, delivering high-energy performances requiring superhuman stamina and emotional resilience. The applause grew louder, more demanding, more intoxicating, and more imprisoning. Each standing ovation validated the systematic destruction of her authentic self while reinforcing her dependence on external validation rather than internal self-worth. The security protocols necessary for someone of her fame level meant that normal social interactions became virtually impossible. Every public space was a potential photo opportunity. Every casual conversation was subject to eavesdropping by photographers and reporters, and every relationship had to be evaluated for its potential impact on her public image rather than its value for her personal happiness or emotional development. The isolation created by these circumstances was profound and multifaceted. She was surrounded by people at all times, security personnel, managers, assistants, and other staff. But these were professional relationships rather than genuine human connections. The people closest to her were paid to be there, which made it difficult to trust their motivations or believe in their affection when conflicts arose. The pressure to maintain America's sweetheart image while evolving into a mature performer created psychological tensions impossible to resolve. Every public appearance was analyzed for moral corruption signs or evidence she was growing up too fast, while industry demands pushed toward increasingly adult themes that would keep her relevant as her audience aged alongside her. Her relationship with Justin Timberlake, which began during this period, provided some respite from this isolation, but it was also subject to intense public scrutiny that made normal relationship development nearly impossible. Every aspect of their romance was analyzed by tabloid media, and fans who felt entitled to know intimate details about their private lives. The pressure to maintain a perfect couple image added stress to what might otherwise have been a healthy young adult relationship, creating artificial expectations that no real relationship could sustain indefinitely. What should have been normal teenage romantic experiences became performance art, with genuine feelings subordinated to public relations strategies neither fully understood or controlled. Their public appearances together were choreographed like music videos. Their interviews were coordinated to reinforce compatible brand messages, and their private moments together were increasingly rare as their relationship became primarily a vehicle for mutual career advancement. Behind the scenes, the business infrastructure was becoming increasingly complex and controlling, with family members, managers, and executives making decisions about her career and personal life she was expected to accept without question. The system justified this control by pointing to commercial success as if financial achievement proved the methods were not only acceptable but necessary. The sexual awakening that should have been a natural part of adolescence was instead transformed into marketing strategy, with carefully calibrated increases in provocative content designed to maintain audience engagement while avoiding moral backlash from conservative critics. Her own feelings about sexuality, relationships, and physical intimacy were secondary to commercial calculations about optimal timing for image evolution. Her second album, Oops, I Did It Again 2000, represented both artistic evolution and increased commercial pressure. The title track's playful acknowledgement of mistakes became ironic given how little room for error her actual life contained. The promotional campaign pushed her image boundaries further, acknowledging her transition from teenager to young adult while trying to maintain the innocence central to her initial appeal. The new millennium brought Britney, 2001, and I'm a Slave for You, words that seemed like playful innuendo to most listeners but carried uncomfortable implications about autonomy and control for those paying attention. The song's success proved audiences would accept increasingly adult themes from someone they'd watched grow up in public, but also demonstrated how little agency she had in defining her artistic expression. The psychological trap was now complete. The success generated by surrendering control created pressure to surrender even more control in pursuit of greater success. Each achievement raised the stakes for the next project, making it increasingly difficult to reclaim any aspect of personal autonomy without risking the commercial empire that had been built around her manufactured persona. During one particularly memorable performance, she writhed on stage with a python draped around her shoulders as thousands screamed approval. The snake's weight pressed against her throat like a living metaphor for the suffocating nature of fame itself. The image became iconic, but those who understood the symbolism recognized it as a perfect representation of her situation. Beautiful, dangerous, and completely beyond her control. The cumulative effect of years of this treatment was the development of what psychologists call complex trauma, a pattern of psychological adaptation to chronic powerlessness and control that affects every aspect of personality development and relationship formation. She was learning to survive in an environment where her authentic self was not just unwelcome but actively dangerous to her economic security and social survival. By the time she reached 18, the transformation was so complete that the distinction between Britney Spears the person and Britney Spears the product had become almost meaningless. She was trapped inside a performance that had consumed her identity so thoroughly that she couldn't remember who she had been before the coaching began. The golden cage was now her only reality, and the applause that had once lifted her up was becoming the sound of her own psychological imprisonment. The teenager who should have been developing independence, forming authentic relationships, and discovering her own values and preferences was instead locked into a pattern of perpetual performance, where every aspect of life was subject to external control and commercial evaluation. The stage was set for the breakdown that would come years later, when the psychological costs of this systematic dehumanization finally exceeded her ability to maintain the performance that had become indistinguishable from her survival. The applause was becoming deafening. The chains were tightening around her throat like that python, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Justin's Cry Me a River, released after their 2002 breakup, transformed their private separation into public entertainment while positioning him as wronged party and her as unfaithful ex-girlfriend. The music video featured a Britney look-alike in scenarios clearly designed to humiliate and blame her for their relationship's end. The asymmetry in how their post-relationship narratives were received revealed uncomfortable truths about gender, sexuality, and different standards applied to male and female celebrities when relationships end badly. While Justin's career flourished and his reputation remained largely intact, Britney was subjected to intense moral judgment and character assassination that would follow her for years. The same tabloid media that had profited from covering their romance now devoted endless coverage to portraying her as a heartbreaker, a temptress, a corrupting influence on America's golden boy. The narrative was both deeply unfair and incredibly damaging to someone who was already struggling with the psychological effects of years of systematic control. The period following her breakup with Justin marked the beginning of Britney's most public unraveling, though it might be more accurate to describe it as the moment when private psychological pressure finally became impossible to hide from public view. The custody battle with Kevin Federline, whom she had married in a desperate attempt to create authentic personal connections outside the entertainment industry machinery, created a legal arena where every aspect of her personal life became subject to judicial scrutiny and media speculation. The paparazzi-feeding frenzy that surrounded this period transformed ordinary activities into high-stakes drama, with photographers following her everywhere hoping to capture images that could be sold to tabloids hungry for evidence of erratic behavior. The economic incentives driving this coverage meant that her worst moments were the most valuable. creating a perverse situation where personal struggles became profitable entertainment for an industry that had no stake in her recovery or well-being. The pressure was relentless and inescapable. She couldn't go to a grocery store, visit a coffee shop, or take her children to a playground without being swarmed by photographers whose aggressive tactics often created dangerous situations. The constant surveillance made normal parenting nearly impossible while simultaneously providing ammunition for critics who used the chaotic scenes as evidence of her unfitness as a mother. February 16, 2007. In a Tarzana salon, electric clippers buzz against silence. Golden hair falls to the floor in silk ribbons. Britney stares at her reflection. Finally, something she can control. The woman who had been styled, photographed, and commodified since childhood was cutting away the very symbol of her manufactured perfection. For a brief moment, the person inside the product was asserting herself in the only way that seemed possible. But instead of being interpreted as a cry for help from someone clearly struggling with overwhelming pressure, the incident became a punchline and symbol of celebrity breakdown that reinforced stereotypes rather than encouraging understanding. The photographs of her with a shaved head became some of the most widely circulated images of the 2000s, turning her moment of desperation into global entertainment, while providing no meaningful support for someone who was obviously in crisis. The rehabilitation facility visits that followed were conducted under intense media scrutiny that made genuine therapeutic progress nearly impossible to achieve. Every entrance and exit was photographed. Every treatment decision was subject to public debate, and every sign of improvement or setback became content for magazines and television shows that had discovered her personal struggles generated enormous audience engagement. Months later, in Beverly Hills legal offices, different sounds filled the air. Papers rustling as pens scratched signatures. Her father, Jamie, signed conservatorship documents granting him control over every aspect of her existence. Between the buzz of clippers cutting through illusion and the scratch of signatures filing away freedom, the transformation from person to product was complete. The conservatorship established in February 2008 was presented as necessary intervention to protect someone unable to make rational decisions about her own welfare. The legal arrangement gave her father and attorney Andrew Wallet control over virtually every aspect of her life: finances, career decisions, medical care, personal relationships. The system was supposedly temporary, designed to provide stability during a crisis period while she recovered her ability to function independently. But the conservatorship also created economic incentives that made its continuation profitable for everyone except Britney herself. The arrangement generated millions of dollars in fees for lawyers, managers, and other professionals while ensuring that her earning potential could be maximized without her consent or meaningful participation in decision-making about her own career. The years that followed were marked by a carefully orchestrated performance of normalcy that masked profound psychological suffering. While the public saw spectacular tours, chart-topping albums, and seemingly successful comeback narratives, those closest to the situation understood they were witnessing something far more troubling: the systematic harvesting of someone's talent while their personhood was held hostage by legal documents. The circus era, which began shortly after the conservatorship was established, seemed to acknowledge the surreal nature of her situation with songs and imagery that referenced performance, spectacle, and the relationship between entertainers and audiences. The title track's lyrics about being a performer in the center ring of a three-ring circus took on additional meaning given the legal arrangements that had made her life into a form of controlled entertainment for the benefit of others. During this period, Britney's public appearances became exercises in cognitive dissonance for those who paid close attention. Her performances remained technically excellent, demonstrating that her artistic abilities were intact despite the personal struggles that had justified the conservatorship's creation. But there was something hollow about her stage presence, as if the spark that had once made her magnetic had been dimmed by the weight of constant supervision and control. The elaborate production values of her tours created spectacular entertainment experiences, while simultaneously demonstrating the level of control that others exercised over every aspect of her professional presentation. Every costume change, every dance move, every interaction with audiences had been pre-planned by teams of professionals who made decisions without meaningful input from the person whose body and voice were executing their vision. The applause continued, but now it sounded hollow, mechanical, the sound of a music box dancer spinning endlessly in a gilded cage. Behind the scenes, the conservatorship had evolved into a complex business enterprise involving dozens of lawyers, managers, medical professionals, and other service providers who generated millions of dollars in fees while claiming to act in her best interests. The financial arrangements created perverse incentives where many of the people making decisions about her life had economic reasons to maintain the current system rather than working toward her independence. The medical aspects of the conservatorship were particularly concerning, as they gave others legal authority to make decisions about psychiatric treatment, medication, and other healthcare issues without her meaningful consent. The power to control someone's medical treatment is among the most intimate forms of authority that can be exercised over another person, and using it in service of commercial interests raised serious questions about medical ethics and human rights that would only be fully understood years later. Her personal relationships during this period were subject to approval by conservatorship authorities, meaning that romantic connections, friendships, and even family relationships were evaluated based on their potential impact on her commercial value and public image rather than her own emotional needs or preferences. This level of interference in personal relationships would have been considered abusive in almost any other context, but the legal framework of the conservatorship made it not only permissible but enforceable through court orders. Her attempts to communicate with the outside world were carefully monitored and controlled. Social media posts that appeared under her name were subject to approval by conservatorship authorities, making it difficult to distinguish between authentic self-expression and manufactured content designed to maintain her public image. The few times genuine emotion seemed to break through the controlled messaging, it was quickly explained away or dismissed as evidence of her continued need for supervision. The isolation created by these restrictions was profound and multifaceted. Not only was she physically separated from people who might have provided emotional support, but she was also psychologically isolated by the knowledge that any expression of dissatisfaction with her situation could be used as evidence that she still needed to be under conservatorship. This created a trap where seeking help or expressing unhappiness could be interpreted as proof that help was needed, making meaningful resistance nearly impossible. The few romantic relationships she was allowed to pursue during this period were brief and unsatisfying, characterized by her inability to allow potential partners close enough to discover the extent of her problems, while simultaneously craving the kind of understanding and acceptance that she felt unable to deserve or maintain. The elaborate system she had developed for managing her condition required constant vigilance that made authentic emotional connections nearly impossible to sustain over time. Years passed. The conservatorship was periodically reviewed by courts, but these proceedings were conducted largely in secret with limited public information about the specific reasons for continuing the arrangement or the criteria that would need to be met for it to be terminated. This secrecy made it difficult for outside observers to evaluate whether the conservatorship was still necessary or had become a form of institutionalized control that was being maintained for the benefit of those who profited from it. The Free Britney movement that began emerging around this time represented growing public awareness that something was fundamentally wrong with her situation, though the movement's supporters had limited information about the specific details of how the conservatorship was affecting her daily life. The grassroots activism demonstrated that many people who had followed her career understood that the legal arrangements were inconsistent with the values of autonomy and self-determination that most adults take for granted. The movement also highlighted how conservatorship laws, which were originally designed to protect elderly people with dementia or individuals with severe developmental disabilities, were being used to control a woman who was clearly capable of performing complex professional tasks and maintaining personal relationships. The disconnect between the legal justification for the conservatorship and the evidence of her capabilities raised uncomfortable questions about who benefits from these arrangements and whether they were being used appropriately. Social media became a crucial tool for the movement's growth, allowing information to spread rapidly and enabling coordinated action across geographic boundaries. Supporters shared court documents, analyzed her public appearances for signs of distress, and created networks of mutual aid that provided resources for legal challenges and public awareness campaigns. The documentary Framing Britney Spears, released in early 2021, brought mainstream media attention to issues that had been raised by grassroots activists for years. The film's examination of her treatment by tabloid media, the entertainment industry, and legal systems helped shift public perception from viewing her as a troubled celebrity to understanding her as someone whose rights had been systematically violated. But perhaps more importantly, the documentary revealed how complicit mainstream media had been in creating and maintaining the narrative that justified her loss of autonomy. The same outlets that had profited from covering her struggles were now forced to confront their role in perpetuating systems that had caused genuine harm to someone whose only crime had been becoming famous while female and vulnerable. The legal strategy that eventually led to her liberation required years of patient work by attorneys who understood that challenging the conservatorship system meant confronting not just individual bad actors but institutional biases that made it difficult for anyone trapped in such arrangements to regain their freedom. The appointment of Matthew Rosengart as her chosen attorney marked a turning point, as someone finally had legal standing to advocate specifically for her interests rather than the interests of the conservatorship system itself. When does care become captivity? For Britney Spears, the answer had become unmistakable as temporary emergency measures had calcified into permanent control systems that benefited everyone except the person they were supposedly designed to protect. June 23, 2021. After 13 years of being represented by lawyers she didn't choose, speaking on her behalf in proceedings she couldn't attend, making decisions about her life without her meaningful input or consent, Britney Spears was finally allowed to address the court directly about her conservatorship. The contrast couldn't have been starker. Once she had commanded stages before tens of thousands of screaming fans, now she sat in her car, phone pressed to her ear, addressing a judge she couldn't even see. Her 20-minute statement to Judge Brenda Penny was searing in its honesty and devastating in its implications for everyone who had participated in or benefited from the conservatorship system. Speaking from her phone while sitting in her car, she described a life of controlled misery that bore no resemblance to the protective arrangement that had been presented to the public and the court system for over a decade. "I just want my life back," she told the judge, her voice breaking with years of suppressed frustration and pain. "It's been a long time since I've owned my money, and it's my wish and my dream for all of this to end without being tested." The simple request for basic adult autonomy highlighted how completely her rights had been stripped away under the guise of protection and medical necessity. The specific allegations she made during her testimony painted a picture of control so comprehensive and invasive that it challenged fundamental assumptions about human dignity and personal autonomy in modern American society. She described being forced to take medications that made her feel like a zombie, being prevented from removing an IUD despite wanting to have more children, and being compelled to continue working when she wanted to take breaks for her mental and physical health. "I've lied and told the whole world I'm okay and I'm happy," she revealed, acknowledging the performance that had been required to maintain the fiction that the conservatorship was working in her best interests. "It's a lie. I thought maybe if I said it enough, maybe I would become happy, because I've been in denial. I've been in shock. I am traumatized. The courtroom audience and media representatives who heard her testimony were stunned by the contrast between her articulate, detailed presentation and the narrative of incapacity that had been used to justify 13 years of legal control. Her ability to speak clearly about complex financial, medical, and personal issues demonstrated cognitive abilities that seemed completely inconsistent with the level of control that had been imposed on her life. The global reaction to her testimony was immediate and overwhelming, with the Not Free Britney movement exploding into mainstream consciousness as people around the world recognized that they had witnessed something unprecedented. A competent adult being forced to beg a court for the basic freedoms that most people consider fundamental human rights. The media coverage that followed finally began examining the conservatorship system critically, rather than simply accepting the narrative that it was necessary for her protection. Investigative journalists started asking uncomfortable questions about who had benefited financially from the arrangement, and whether the legal standards for maintaining conservatorships were being applied appropriately in her case. The entertainment industry's response was more complicated, as many of the same companies and individuals who had profited from her work during the conservatorship years now faced questions about their complicity in maintaining a system that she described as abusive and traumatic. The cognitive dissonance between celebrating her artistic achievements and ignoring her personal suffering became impossible to maintain once she had spoken publicly about her experiences. Legal experts began analyzing the broader implications of her case for conservatorship law and disability rights, recognizing that the issues she had raised went far beyond celebrity gossip to touch on fundamental questions about autonomy, dignity, and the power that legal systems can exercise over individual lives. Her testimony had exposed flaws in a system that was supposed to protect vulnerable people but had instead become a mechanism for exploitation and control. The court proceedings that followed moved with unusual speed by judicial standards, as public pressure and media attention created incentives for quick resolution, rather than the prolonged legal maneuvering that had characterized the previous 13 years of conservatorship management. Within months, both her father and the co-conservator had requested to be removed from their roles, citing the changed circumstances and public scrutiny that made their positions untenable. On November 12, 2021, Judge Penny terminated the conservatorship entirely, ruling that Britney was capable of managing her own affairs, and that the arrangement was no longer necessary for her protection. The decision was met with celebration from supporters around the world who had followed her story and recognized the significance of her legal victory for anyone who had been subjected to similar forms of institutional control. But the end of the conservatorship also raised difficult questions about accountability and restitution for the years of autonomy that had been taken from her during what should have been the prime years of her adult life. The legal victory provided freedom but could not undo the psychological damage of more than a decade spent under comprehensive control by people who had demonstrated more concern for profit than for her well-being. The aftermath of conservatorship termination has revealed both the possibilities and limitations of legal liberation from systems of institutional control. While she now has the legal right to make decisions about her finances, medical care, and personal relationships, the psychological effects of 13 years of comprehensive control cannot be reversed through judicial decree alone. Her memoir, The Woman in Me, published in 2023, provided additional details about her experiences during the conservatorship years while also revealing the ongoing challenges she faces in rebuilding an authentic sense of self after decades of having her identity controlled and commodified by others. The book's success demonstrated continued public interest in her story, but it also highlighted how difficult it can be to separate genuine personal expression from commercial exploitation even after gaining legal freedom. The broader impact of her case on conservatorship law and disability rights advocacy has been significant. with legislators in multiple states introducing reforms designed to prevent similar abuses while still maintaining protections for people who genuinely need assistance managing their affairs. Her testimony helped expose flaws in legal systems that were supposed to protect vulnerable individuals, but had instead created opportunities for exploitation and control. The Free Britney movement has evolved into broader activism around issues of autonomy, consent, and the rights of people with disabilities, mental health conditions, and other circumstances that might make them vulnerable to institutional control. Her case became a touchstone for understanding how legal systems can be misused to benefit those in positions of power while harming the people they claim to protect. The entertainment industry has begun grappling with questions about child performers, parental control, and the systems that enable exploitation of young talent, though meaningful structural changes remain limited. Her story has become a case study in how celebrity culture can consume individuals while generating enormous profits for everyone except the people whose labor and image create the value. Mental health advocacy has been complicated by her case, as discussions about the importance of treatment and support must be balanced against respect for autonomy, and the recognition that mental health concerns don't automatically justify removing someone's civil rights. Her experience demonstrates the need for more nuanced approaches to supporting people during mental health crises without subjecting them to indefinite control by others. Today, Britney Spears represents more than musical achievement or celebrity scandal. She embodies the possibility of reclaiming power from systems designed to exploit vulnerability, and the hope that even the most comprehensive forms of control can be challenged and overcome through persistence, courage, and the support of people who believe that freedom is a fundamental human right, rather than a privilege to be granted or withheld by others. The Princess of Pop became a warrior for freedom, proving that some performances are too important to be left to others to direct. Her voice, which once asked the world to hit her one more time, now carries a different message, that dignity cannot be negotiated away. Autonomy is not negotiable, and the most important audience for anyone's life story is the person living it. The applause that once made her a star had become the chains that bound her. In that Los Angeles courtroom, speaking truth to power, she finally learned to break them. Her liberation stands as proof that even the most gilded cages can be opened when someone finds the courage to demand the key. When protection becomes punishment, freedom isn't given, it's taken.